So I'm going to demo how to actually build your grid and how to actually work with the grid in Adobe Illustrator. For our CD track listing project, I want you to use Adobe Illustrator. So first, let's look at the project brief. I gave you a little bit of background on the grid. I've given you clear directions. Basically, you are going to take this information on page 2. You're going to take all the information from Mastodon's album Leviathan and design the track listing. So what do you have to include? You have to include everything, all of this information except what's in brackets. So artist inside of brackets, you don't have to include that. You do have to include Mastodon. You do not have to include the album title. You do have to include Leviathan. This label you do not have to include, but you do have to include all three of these. Track number, track name, the time for all 10 songs. And then all of this legal information. This all somehow has to be on here as well. You are going to use the Helvetica family. So these 6 styles and weights of the Helvetica family. They should be on your computer already. You may use Helvetica Light Oblique, Helvetica Regular, Helvetica Oblique, Helvetica Bold Oblique. Your fonts may say italic instead of oblique, that's okay. What you cannot use are different weights. You cannot use different widths or styles of Helvetica. So all of these in the right-hand columns are ones that you cannot use. You cannot use ultra compressed, you cannot use condensed, you cannot use Helvetica Inserat. You can see those are actually different designs. You cannot use Helvetica Rounded. If I zoom in a bit more, you'll see it has rounded ends on it. You also may not stretch type disproportionately. You cannot change the proportions of the type, and you also may not outline the type. You'll notice with this example of outlined type that by putting a black outline on the edge of our letter forms, we are grossly distorting the letter forms. So you don't want to do that. So these are all okay, these are not. If you're on a Macintosh, you should have Helvetica. It comes installed. However, if you do not have access to the Helvetica family, you may use the Arial family instead. That's fine. So, I've given you a very specific size, I've given you a specific grid, and there are some requirements. All elements must align to the grid in some way. All elements must run horizontally or vertically, not diagonally. You cannot run things on a diagonal angle. It can be straight up and down or horizontal. Use Helvetica, bold, regular, and light weights, and the italics or obliques of those weights. You may use a variety of type sizes. You may not add any new text or any pictorial elements. So you can't say, I would like a picture of a guitar on here. I would like a picture of a shark on here. No, you can't do that. You cannot say, I want to play this album up, so I'm going to type in, this is the greatest album of all times. No, you can't do that. You can only use the text given. Use black and white only, no colors, no grays. You may use up to 5 rules, which is just a straight line, and 2 rectangles. So you don't have to use those things, but you may. They may be horizontal or vertical, but not diagonal. You need to use the album info provided on page 2. You need to retype it. You cannot copy and paste it. I set this up in such a way that you have to retype it. All of these elements must appear on every layout. Artist name, album title, track listing, which includes the track number, track name, and time, and publication info. Do not include the labels and brackets. Proofread very carefully. I will penalize typos heavily. And think about your kerning. Use everything that you learned in the last project. Apply it to this project. Make all your kerning beautiful. And make sure all text is legible. You don't want your smallest text to just be a gray lump. All right, so let's actually start building this. I'm going to move this brief to my other monitor, and I am going to work in Illustrator. So you make a new document, and you want to set up a custom width, custom size. You want to make it 5 inches wide by 4.25 inches tall. This is the size of the back panel of a CD case. Okay. Now you have two commands that are very, very useful in Illustrator. Command 0 zooms your page to fit. No matter what size it is, it will fit the whole page in your window. And Command 1 will zoom it to actual size, 100% size. So in this case, on my monitor, with this document size, if I do Command 0, it's actually it's actually displaying the layout at 288% size. So it's almost triple size. And if I do Command 1, it's actually fairly small on my screen. I'm going to do Command R, turn on the rulers. And I want to add margins. Margins are space on the sides of our layout. We have margins because we usually don't want text or images running right to the edge of the page. So I'm going to drag a guide from the ruler to a 1/4 inch down, 1/4 inch over from the left, a 1/4 inch over from the right, and a 1/4 inch up from the bottom. Now, these all look like they're in the right place, but I'm on a computer, so I want to be sure that I have my guides in the right place. I find it very, very useful to set up the grid at the beginning as precisely as I possibly can, so that it's like making sure the foundation of your house is completely square and level. If you don't start with a good base, you can't really depend on everything else being accurate as you build on up from there. All right, so I'm going to go to my guides. I'm going to unlock my guides. That means I can move them again. And I'm going to go to my reference points and look at the actual measurements. So you can see my Y, and if you don't have this information up in your top header bar, you can go to Window, Transform, and also see it. Transform will give you all the information about whatever item you have selected. All right, so now you can see my Y-axis. The Y-axis is the vertical axis. My Y position of this guide is 0.2406, which is very close to a 1/4 inch, but I can just go in there and type 0.25 and hit return, and it moves it to the exact position. This is what I like. I like things that are easy to do and very precise. I'm going to do the same thing here. It's 0.2478. Wow, that's so close to a quarter of an inch. Who really cares? I care. Let's make it right. 4.7482. Let's go in here. 4.75. And this one we want to be exactly at 4 inches on our y-axis. Wow, that's so incredibly close, but why be incredibly close when you can be right there? So now I'm going to go back to my guides. I'm going to lock my guides. That is step 2 on your brief. Next, I want to create a grid 4 columns across by 4 rows tall with 1 pica gutters. Gutters are the spaces in between our columns and rows. A little bit of space in between each one. So what I just did there, I drew a box, and I'm just going to give it a 100% magenta fill so that we can see it very easily. I made a box that goes from one margin to the other, left to right, top to bottom. That's my entire usable space of my layout within my margins. And with that box selected, I'm going to go to Object, Path, Split into Grid. If I turn on the preview, this will show me what I'm going to do. So I want 4 rows. The rows are horizontal. I want a gutter of 1 pica. Even though I'm in inches, if I do 1p, that will give me the measurement for pica. In my columns, I want 4 columns and a 1 pica gutter. All right, so what that has done, that has split my single box into a grid, into a 4-row by 4-column wide grid with 1 pica gutters. So I'm going to hit OK, and that's what I have. Now I can use this to drag guides over. I'm dragging them from the ruler over to a line to each of these boxes on my split grid. Now, those of you who are particularly observant, you may have noticed that the split into grid dialog box included an option to add guides. And you may be wondering, well, why didn't he just use that? Why did he pull over those guides by hand? And that's just because, at least in CS6, the guides it adds are very unusual and weird and always visible. I would much rather use the regular Illustrator guides, which can be locked and are non-printing. They're just there when you're working. Now, what I want to do is I want to go to my Layers palette. If you don't already have it visible, you go to Window, Layers, Window, Layers. I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to call this layer Boxes. And I'm going to double click on this. I'm going to make it magenta. No, actually, I'm not going to make it magenta. Excuse me, I'm going to make it yellow. And I am going to select all of the magenta boxes. Now, there's a couple of ways to select multiple items. You can hold down your selection, your black arrow selection, and sort of draw a selection around many things. You can also click one item, hold down Shift. As long as you're holding down Shift, you can select multiple items. Also, if all the items are the same, you can do this. You can select one and go to Select Same Fill Color, for example. That will, you'll notice that selected all of my boxes with the magenta fill. So I'm going to then go to my layers palette and move them all up onto the boxes layer. Then I'm going to move the boxes layer down below my art layer. And I'm going to hide that boxes layer. So what that's done is that has given me an art layer with a grid of Illustrator guidelines. If I hit Command:, it hides the guidelines. Command:, toggles showing them, hiding them. Command:, Command:. This is very, very useful. You can make them visible and invisible to your heart's content. And these blue guidelines do not print, ever. They don't print. They don't show up in a PDF. They're strictly a working tool. So now I have my grid. Okay, I have margins, 1, 2, 3, 4 margins. Then I have 1, 2, 3, 4 columns, 1, 2, 3, 4 rows. I'm going to do now what I should have done right at the beginning and save this. I'm going to type 1, project 5, last game, first initial. All right, what do I always say? Save early, save often. I feel much better. I can sleep now. If my computer crashes, it will have been saved up to this point. All right. So from here, you want to start working with type. So you use the type tool. And it's a very simple tool to use. You click the type tool, you click a spot on the page, you get this flashing cursor, and you start typing. If you want to change the font, you'll notice it defaults to Myriad Pro. I want to use Helvetica. You select the type that you want to change. You can scroll through and find Helvetica. And change the size. You can also just start typing the name, and it will show you all of the options that you have on your hard drive. Now remember, you do not have to align every part of every object to your grid. Okay, you can align it along one side, you can align it along two sides. So for example, here I've put the baseline on this line. I've made this left align here. I could also, if I didn't want it to left align to the columns, I could do that. Now suppose I want to copy this. I can do a couple of things. I want to say, well, I want to work from this size to make the album title. I can select it. I can do Command-C and Command-V, and it will paste a copy down. That's fine. You can do that. You can also, if you select a piece of type or any object in Illustrator with the arrow and hold down the Option key, you can drag a copy away. All right. Normally, if you click something and drag, it just moves it. But if you click, hold down the Option key, you'll notice my arrow gets doubled. It drags a copy away. All right. So I'm going to make this light. So I have my artist name. I have my album title. I'm going to align them both to the grid here. I probably want to go in and I want to look at it at 100%. Remember, don't work entirely zoomed in fit to page because everything is 3 times as big as it will look. Keep looking at it at 100%. I probably want to go in here and adjust the kerning a bit. Employ all of my master kerning ability that I learned in the nameplate project. Kern this all so it looks beautiful. And then I'm going to show you, remember Command: show and hide the grid. And being able to show it and hide it is a wonderful thing. It helps you, it just helps you so many ways. It helps you to be able to hide it, it helps you to be able to see it again. Okay. So I want to do a track listing. And I'm just making up numbers here. You want to be able, you want to use the actual, all of the actual information that you are given in the brief. All right. Track 4 is a long ballad, and track 5 is another short one. I want to show you some ways of organizing the song, the track listing. Now, you'll notice that my artist and album are actually 2 separate pieces of type because I wanted to position them differently. But because with the song names I hit return and kept typing, it treats it as one piece of type that's 5 lines long. All right? And this is very good when you have a list or a paragraph or anything else like that. And I want to show you some ways to work on aligning these. So I'm going to show you how to use the tabs. And before I do that, I want to show you the invisible items. Right in front of me. All right, so under type, show hidden characters. This, if you turn on that option, you will suddenly start to see all these characters, and you're like, hey, what are these? Where did these come from? I don't remember this backwards P being here. I certainly didn't type that. And what are these dots where there should be spaces? These are all invisible characters so that you can see exactly which character is where. This backwards P is called a pilcrow. This indicates the end of a line. It indicates a return, a carriage return. And these dots indicate a space, that we've put a space there. All right, so it's very good to have these invisible characters on sometimes, just so that we can see what's in there. Now I'm going to do a couple of things. I'm going to add tabs with the tab key on my keyboard. So I'm going to replace these spaces with tabs. And the reason is that I want to make sure that all my song titles and track numbers and times are all lined up perfectly. And I'm going to use the tabs to do that. All right, so all of these little arrows are just tab stops. Actually, they're not the tab stops, they're the tabs. I have put tabs in here. Now, if you do, I'm going to make this a little smaller. I'm going to make this 12-point type. If you go to your type menu, I'm sorry, go to View, Shift Command T shows the tabs, and that's under View. I can never remember how to actually get to it. Here it is, under Window Type Tabs. We'll also show this, Shift Command T. This shows all the tab stops. So you need a stop telling it where you want a tab to go. So I'm placing one here, because so everything that's behind this first tab will line up there. And it's set up to be a left justified tab. I'm going to change that to be a right justified tab. So it will right align all of these. And I'm going to move it over a little bit more. I'm going to move it to there. So all of them will right align there. I'm going to do another one here and make that a left justified. I want it to left justify all the song titles. All right? And now I'm going to do one more over here for all my track times. I want all of those to line up in a perfect column. So I'm going to use the tabs for that. And I can adjust these to my heart's content. I can also make this a right align. Let's say I want all of these to line up with my right-hand margin on the right. Okay? So that is one way to organize your track listing. All right. What else? Let's talk about the legal info. So I want to include the copyright info because your legal department always wants that. Now you may find a couple of characters like the copyright symbol, which is a C inside of a circle, or the registered mark, which is an R inside of a circle. And how do you get those? Well, you can just see, I couldn't remember. I thought option C was the copyright, but it's not. It's a C with a cedilla. Option R is the registered mark. So you can just sort of flail around with the option keys and try to find these things. Or you can use this amazingly handy window. Window type glyphs. It was in my other monitor. The glyphs window shows you every single character that you have available to you in the font. Wow, look at this. Helvetica has a lot of characters. We have that Pilcrow. We have the register mark here. We have all kinds of fractions. We have mathematical signs. We have all kinds of letters with diacritics if we want to typeset things properly in French or Turkish or Italian or Spanish. We have it all there. We even have Cyrillic if we need to put something in Russian language. And Greek. This, I believe, is Greek down here at the bottom, if I'm not mistaken. So we have a lot of characters in our font, a lot more characters in the font that are not in our keyboard. But for now, we just need copyright. So here, I found copyright. You can double click on it and it inserts it into your text because I had text located. So let's say this album is from 1994. Does that make it 30 years old? No, it makes it 20 years old. My mistake. Now, the lawyers always want this stuff because it protects you, but, you know, in our hierarchy, we want this to be a relatively small thing. We want this to be a relatively unimportant thing. Designers would much rather we didn't have to put in copyright or legalese, but we do have to. So the challenge is to put it in there in an interesting way or put it in there in such a way that you only really even see it if you need it. So I'm going to make it small. All right, I'm going to make it, and you know, it still looks too small. I'm going to make it like 4 points. All right, so can anyone guess what the problem is here? I'm looking at this and I'm like, yeah, that's a good size. Oh, and it fits almost perfectly within one column. Yeah, I like it. Well, I'm forgetting that I'm now at 283% size. If I actually look at this actual size, well, that's too tiny to read. It's actually impossible to read. There's no way. You need a magnifying glass. So you don't want it so small that you need a magnifying glass. A good rule of thumb is basically your minimum size for type should be 6 points. You never want to go below 6-point type as a rule of thumb. For those of you who are not native English speakers, a rule of thumb means a general guideline. It's not an absolute rule, but generally you probably don't want to go below 6 points. And to check it, make sure you look at this at actual size. Command 1, actual size. All right, so I have my track listing. It's a little boring. Like I would like to do something else. I think I'm gonna experiment with duplicating the album title. So I'm gonna have multiple copies of the album title. Let's see if I can do something sort of interesting with that. Maybe some of them will bleed off the page. Okay, now I want to show you, maybe I'll make it really dense in here and do a lot of copies and then have a white one on top of it. Show you a type crime, something that you just simply should not ever do because it distorts letter forms and it makes type designers cry and it makes your professor angry. So the first type crime is if you take type and distort it disproportionately. All right? So that, I moved it, I made it wider than it is tall. Now hopefully it should be very obvious to you that it's wider than it is tall, but if you ever are not sure, you go to Window, type, look at the character. I can see here, if you go to show options, you can see here that my vertical scale is 100%, my horizontal scale is 197%. So it's almost twice as wide as it is tall. You never want that. You want it to be the same height and width proportionally. Now that just sort of happened by mistake. I wanted to make it bigger. I grabbed a corner. You know, I tried to keep it the same, but you can see this time my horizontal scale is less than my vertical, so it's actually being condensed in width artificially. Well, how do I stop that from happening? If you're scaling a piece of type and you hold down Shift, it will scale it proportionally. All right? This works for any object in Illustrator. If you had a star and you scale it, if you just grab a corner and scale it, you can scale it completely disproportionately, but if you grab a corner, hold down Shift, it keeps the original proportion. All right? Another type crime is to outline type. And all new designers try this. They're like, well, I'd like it to be white on the inside and black on the outside. Well, the problem is that actually distorts the letter forms. If we look at two of them side by side, this one with no stroke and a black fill, and the one below with a white fill and a black stroke, you can see that it looks different because the stroke actually makes it a little bit wider. You can see that it distorts the form. It makes things thicker. Look at where the outline joins. Here it starts doing weird things. There it starts doing weird things. There it starts doing weird things. Here. And you don't want to do it, so don't do that. You want to keep a solid fill and no stroke, almost always on type. You almost always want to do that. All right, so let me do what I was going to do. There. All right, so I think that's a slightly more interesting. Maybe I'll move this up here. Now, I think I also want to add a rule. Let me show you guys how to add the rules. I'm going to add a rule just above my track listing, just to sort of separate it from the chaos happening just above it. And that is very simple. We have a rule tool, a line segment tool. If you just click, hold down one end, and find the other end, it will do a diagonal line. If you click, hold down Shift, it will do a perfectly straight line. So whether it's perfectly vertical or perfectly diagonal or perfectly horizontal. Now you may notice I drew those lines and there's nothing there. That's because I drew some lines with no stroke and no fill. So I want to put a black stroke on these. Okay? Your stroke can be thicker or thinner. And if you go to Window, Stroke, there's a whole stroke palette here. So let's say I want to make it 3 points, and you can control the caps. I want to give it round caps, for example. And you have all these options for strokes. Okay? So there we go. There's my album. If you print this, first of all, it will only print what's in white. It won't print what's on the gray. So these copies of the album title that are bleeding off the edge will not print. Second, the guidelines will not print. Okay? They will not show up in the PDF. So now let's talk about, you need to do 3 of these, and you need to choose one. So you could start over here and do a new artboard and line it up and build yourself a grid all over again and all of those good things. What you can also do is have the artboard tool, select it, hold down Option, that will copy the entire artboard. And if you unlock your guides, it will copy the entire artboard. Oh, it's making a liar out of me. It didn't copy the guides. All right, so actually a better way to do this would be to turn your boxes layer back on. If you go to the artboard tool, you can create a new artboard, and you'll see that it will align with the old one, and you can create another new one this way. It defaults to creating the new artboard same exact size as your old one. Okay. We can hide our art for a minute. Go to the boxes layer, and if we can actually cheat a little bit and draw a little box in the corner to go from the top left corner to the first box in our grid, we hold down Option, that copies everything, and we can do it again this way, Option. Alright, so that does not copy all of the guidelines, but it does copy some of them, and you can just drag down the rest of the guidelines. Now, remember that these boxes in the background are just there for you to build your grid. They're just there for you to help you set up your guidelines. You do not want to print those bright magenta boxes. No, no, no. Every semester, some student does this. They hand in a project, and it has all these bright hot pink boxes in the background. And for some reason, despite me telling them, despite it, they think that they need to print it. You do not want to print these background boxes. They're just there to help you build your grid. In fact, I recommend you keep it turned off unless you need it. Oh, and so what happened there? I drew all my guides. Guides are on a particular layer. So you'll notice when I highlight them, they're all yellow because they're on the boxes layer. So I can drag them up to the art layer. And there we go. Now everything's in the art layer. Now, if I were a student, I would be using the real text. I would be designing 3 of these. Um, I would be printing them, I would be proofreading them, I'd be looking very carefully for typos, I'd be looking uh, very carefully to make sure that everything is legible at 100% size. I'd be looking very carefully at all of my kerning throughout. I expect you to all uh, employ everything that you learned in the last project to make your kerning beautiful. All right, and that's about all I have to tell you guys for your grid project. So good luck.